All right, picture this. You're standing on the Mediterranean island of Crete, thousands of years ago. Rising up above the sun-drenched landscape is just this absolute architectural marvel. It's a massive, multi-story palace complex that serves as the beating heart of one of Europe's earliest known, highly complex Bronze Age civilizations. And everywhere you look, there is just vibrant life. You've got these stunning, incredibly colorful frescoes decorating the walls, while the huge courtyards are absolutely bustling with merchants, scribes, and artisans. They're trading precious metals from exotic ships anchored right there in the crowded harbors. I mean, the civilization is wealthy, they are incredibly powerful, and they are entirely connected to the wider Aegean world. They are for sure the absolute masters of their domain. But then, the vibe totally flips. We abruptly shift from that vibrant scene of life to a scene of sudden, terrifying chaos. Those massive stone buildings, damaged. The earth beneath their feet starts shaking violently. And somewhere across the sea, a colossal volcanic eruption literally rips the sky apart, sending up a towering plume of ash that completely blocks out the sun. The vibrant courtyards go dead silent. That sprawling trade network is entirely disrupted. And eventually, this magnificent civilization that once completely dominated the Aegean begins to fundamentally transform and decline.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because honestly, this is one of the greatest historical mysteries we have. How does a civilization so advanced, so wealthy, and so deeply connected just seemingly vanish from the height of its power? In today's Explainer, we're going to treat this like a historical cold case. We need to investigate exactly what caused the ultimate downfall of the Minoans, because understanding their fall helps us truly understand just how fragile ancient globalized networks could be.
Section 1. The Scene of the Disappearance. Profiling the Minoans.
To solve this cold case, we first need to understand our subject, right? We have to profile the people who actually built these extraordinary palaces. And right out of the gate, we hit the very first layer of our mystery, the word Minoan. It's entirely made up by us. It's a modern archaeological term coined back in the early 20th century by a British archaeologist named Sir Arthur Evans, and he just named them after the legendary King Minos from Greek mythology. We have absolutely no idea what these people actually call themselves. And the real consequence here is that our entire modern perception of them is heavily filtered through this 20th century archaeologist's obsession with Greek myth, rather than their own true, authentic identity.
Now, looking across the Bronze Age timeline, through the early, middle, and late periods, it's important to know this wasn't some overnight success story. Over hundreds and hundreds of years, they slowly evolved from smaller, scattered settlements into a highly organized society. By the time we hit the middle and late periods, they were constructing architectural wonders that were literally centuries ahead of their time, completely transforming the entire landscape of Crete. The absolute crown jewels of this civilization were their so-called palaces at sites like Knossos, Phaistos, Mallia, and Zokros. But, the word palace is actually kind of misleading. If you're imagining a simple royal residence with a king on a throne, you're picturing it all wrong. These were sprawling, multifunctional hubs. Think of them more like the ancient equivalent of a Silicon Valley megacampus. They featured massive central courtyards, elaborate staircases, vast storerooms packed with olive oil and grain, bustling workshops, and get this, even highly advanced drainage systems. They were the administrative and economic engines that kept the whole civilization humming. Now, what's really interesting about this next point is how it completely busts one of the biggest myths in popular culture. When most of us hear about ancient Crete and King Minos, we instantly think of the Minotaur, right? That terrifying half-man, half-bull monster trapped in a labyrinth. And sure enough, those gorgeous, colorful frescoes the Minoans painted do heavily feature bulls, but these images actually point to a deep religious reverence and powerful symbolism, not a literal monster lurking down in a basement. It's just a fascinating example of how later cultures essentially weaponized real Minoan religious iconography to create their own dramatic myths.
And they weren't just landlocked builders either. They were the absolute supreme sea power of the Bronze Age. Minoan ships were constantly crisscrossing the Mediterranean. They were trading with mainland Greece, sailing east over to Cyprus and Anatolia, heading way south to Egypt, and reaching the Levant. By controlling these absolutely crucial maritime trade routes, Crete became staggeringly wealthy and culturally influential. They were importing raw materials, exporting their highly sought-after crafted goods, and basically acting as the undisputed center of a vibrant, interconnected, ancient global economy.
Section 2. The Uncracked Code, Minoan Voices Lost. So, we know they were master builders, incredible artists, and dominant merchants. But here is the most frustrating part of our whole historical investigation. Their own voices have been entirely silenced by time.
The Minoans had their own unique writing system, which archaeologists call Linear A. But unlike Linear B, which was used a bit later in the Aegean and has been successfully deciphered as an early form of Greek, Linear A remains a completely uncracked code. It's wild. We can look at their clay tablets, we can see the elegant strokes of their script, but we cannot read a single sentence of their history, their poetry, or their perspective in their own words. It just leaves this massive, echoing void in our understanding of who they really were.
Section 3. Investigating the disasters, volcanoes, and earthquakes.
If they were so advanced and so powerful, what actually brought them down? To answer that, we have to turn our attention to the prime suspects: massive, catastrophic environmental disasters. And this brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the terror they faced. Just north of Crete lies the island of Thera, which we know today as Santorini. During the Bronze Age, Thera experienced one of the largest, most violent volcanic eruptions in the history of the ancient world. It was a devastating cascade of disasters. The initial massive eruption blew the island apart, which triggered these catastrophic tsunamis that slammed into the coastal settlements of Crete, totally destroying ports and ships. Enormous quantities of ash blanketed the region, blocking out the sun, severely disrupting agriculture and plunging their highly tuned regional economy into absolute chaos. And beyond the volcanic threat, Crete sits in a highly active tectonic zone. Earthquakes were a constant, terrifying reality for them. When archaeologists dig down through Minoan sites, they frequently find distinct destruction layers, clear evidence of massive walls toppled and buildings totally crushed by violent tremors. The earth literally shook their magnificent palaces to pieces on multiple occasions throughout their history.
Section 4. The final shift, a new rising power.
So, the crucial point is, you might be thinking a massive volcano and constant earthquakes are the clear, obvious answers to our mystery. Case closed, right? Actually, wrong. The Minoans were incredibly resilient. When an earthquake knocked down a palace, they just rebuilt it. They survived the environmental disruptions and the tsunamis. Natural disasters alone didn't finish them off. The real answer lies in a much more complex, gradual shift. Because centuries after the Great Eruption of Thera, the archaeological record shows something entirely different happening. The grand palaces are eventually abandoned or repurposed. The vibrant, unique political and artistic world of the Minoans transforms. And we see the clear, undeniable arrival of a new rising power coming in from mainland Greece, the Mycenaeans. The culture of the Aegean was changing permanently. The Minoans survived the shaking earth. They survived the ash and the tsunamis of one of history's greatest volcanic eruptions. But despite all that resilience, their grand palaces still, eventually, fell silent. So if the volcano didn't destroy them by itself, who or what actually finished the transformation of Europe's first great Bronze Age civilization? Well, that is exactly what we are going to uncover next time as we investigate the Mycenaeans and the final days of Minoan Crete. Stay curious, and I'll see you in part 2 of this explainer. You know, that massive volcano might have completely rocked the Minoan world, but it absolutely did not end it. Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're digging into the wild aftermath of that disaster and unraveling the final transformation of the Minoan civilization.
Okay, let's dive right into this, because this is where the story gets incredibly fascinating. We all know the Thera eruption was catastrophic, right? But if the Minoans actually survived it, and they did, why on earth did their great palaces eventually fall? How does an advanced society weather one of the absolute greatest natural disasters in human history, only to lose their palatial civilization years later? For the longest time, everyone just assumed the volcano wiped them out in one huge, dramatic blow. Like, poof, gone. But the archaeological evidence actually tells a completely different story. Now, while there's still a lot of ongoing debate about the precise date of the Thera eruption and exactly when its effects hit, one thing is absolutely certain. Minoan society continued. Their communities recovered, their vital maritime trade continued, and Minoan culture remained highly influential across the wider Aegean. The eruption was a catastrophe, absolutely, but it was not the single event that ended Minoan civilization. So what actually did? Section 1. The New Suspects. The Rise of the Mycenaean Greeks. Now, what's really interesting about this evidence is that while the Minoans were busy recovering on the island of Crete, a brand new heavyweight was rising over on mainland Greece. We're talking about the Mycenaeans. Centers like Mycenae, Pylos, Tiryns, and Thebes were quickly becoming major Bronze Age powers. Slowly but surely, Mycenaean influence became increasingly visible on Crete.
And the literal smoking gun of their takeover, we found it in writing. On one hand, you have Linear A, the Minoans' original, undeciphered script. But on the other hand, you have Linear B, which has been deciphered, and we actually know it records an early form of Greek. And guess what archaeologists found at Knossos and other major Minoan sites? Deciphered Linear B tablets. Tablets recording administration, goods, people, and economic activity. The crucial point here is that this written evidence proves, without a doubt, that Mycenaean Greek-speaking administrators were physically operating in parts of Crete during the Late Bronze Age. This wasn't just friendly trade. This was a massive political and cultural transformation.
But it wasn't exactly a peaceful overnight transition. The archaeological record of this collapse is, well, it's highly complex. We see that many important Minoan buildings were heavily damaged or outright destroyed around the later Bronze Age. But here's the catch. Not every site was destroyed at exactly the same time. We aren't looking at just one isolated event, but rather a perfect storm of causes. You have earthquakes, warfare, internal political instability, severe economic disruption, shifting trade networks, that rising Mycenaean pressure we just talked about, and on top of all that, ongoing environmental challenges. Archaeologists haven't proven a single lone cause, and honestly, we really shouldn't claim absolute certainty where the evidence is still so deeply debated.
And honestly, this perfectly illustrates why we can't just view this as an overnight apocalypse. Take the famous palace complex of Knossos, for instance. Remarkably, Knossos actually survived longer than some of the other Minoan centers. But it didn't just survive as some sort of untouched Minoan time capsule. No, the evidence suggests it transitioned into an important Mycenaean administrative center. It's just an incredible example of how this era represents a gradual transition of power, rather than the simple, instantaneous disappearance of an entire civilization.
So this brings us to a massive popular misconception. We really have to scrap the idea that the Minoans simply vanished into thin air. Just think about how later Greek legends compare to the actual archaeology. We all know the stories, right? King Minos, the winding labyrinth, the terrifying Minotaur. While it's highly likely that later Greek memories of Bronze Age Crete kind of inspired this mythology, I am sorry to disappoint the monster hunters out there, but there is zero archaeological evidence for a literal half-human, half-bull creature running around a maze. The actual archaeological reality is that populations remained on Crete. Their incredible artistic traditions continued. Their settlements continued to exist, and their religious practices evolved. The people didn't just vanish. It was their language and their political systems that changed. It was the collapse of a system, not the extinction of every single Minoan person.
So what we're actually looking at here is more like a massive domino effect of transformation. First, the civilization is rocked by the Thera eruption and its wider environmental fallout. Then, you compound that with ongoing earthquakes, geological instability, and severe disruptions to their trade. Next, the balance of power completely shifts with political changes and the rapid rise of the Mycenaeans. Finally, all of this culminates in the destruction, social restructuring, and eventual abandonment of those grand palatial centers. The civilization was weakened and transformed over a very long period of time, rather than instantly erased by one dramatic blow.
Section 2. The bigger picture. The Bronze Age collapse.
Because you see, the Minoan transformation didn't just happen in a vacuum. Around the end of the second millennium BCE, several major civilizations across the entire Eastern Mediterranean experienced a massive, system-wide disruption. The Mycenaean Greeks themselves, the very ones who exerted influence over Crete, well, they eventually collapsed too. The mighty Hittite Empire fell. Parts of the Levant and other Eastern Mediterranean centers were radically transformed. And historians debate the causes of this incredible collapse to this very day. Was it warfare, mass migration, climate changes, severe drought, or more earthquakes? It was most likely an interconnected system failure, with absolutely no single universal explanation to tie it all up in a neat little bow.
But despite the eventual fall of their political system, just look at what the Minoans actually left behind. We have this astounding legacy of complex architecture, vivid, beautiful frescoes, stunning ceramics, vast maritime connections, and really deep religious symbolism. Thanks to modern archaeological discoveries, the Minoans were completely transformed from a largely forgotten Bronze Age culture into one of Europe's most famous and celebrated ancient civilizations.
The final verdict. What really destroyed the Minoans? Ultimately, there was no single apocalyptic disaster. It was a centuries-long blend of environmental stress and a shifting political takeover. As we picture the ruins of Knossos at sunset, the faded frescoes, the massive stone walls, the silent corridors, and the Mediterranean Sea just beyond, we are drawn back to one of archaeology's most fascinating mysteries, a fragment of Linear A, a writing system created thousands of years ago, still waiting to be understood.
The Minoans did not vanish into thin air. Their world changed, their palaces fell, their political system transformed, and a completely new Aegean order emerged. But one mystery remains locked in the symbols they left behind. Somewhere in those undeciphered signs may be the voices of the people who built this extraordinary civilization. Until Linear A can truly be read, part of the Minoan story will remain completely silent, which really makes you wonder, what other lost civilizations are just waiting for us to finally speak their language? This has been Mystery Vault. Until next time, keep questioning history.